Welcome, hello, and hi, my creative friends. Today we're checking out a pencil from a company famous for crayons. From a company whose product is beloved by tiny children everywhere and one of the most well-known crayon manufacturers in the world comes a colourful, vibrant pencil that I can guarantee isn't actually a crayon. Today I present to you the Crayola Colored Pencils. Crayola is so well known here in Australia and I guess the world as the tiny person's choice for a crayon brand that I really wasn't aware of anything else they actually do. But boy, do they do a lot more than just crayons. Everything from chalk to paint to markers and everything else in between, including of course, pencils. Crayola has a couple of different ranges of colored pencils, but today we're looking at the one that a lot of you have actually asked me to check out, and that is of course the Crayola Original Pencil, simply known as the Crayola Colored Pencils. I'm actually not super sure what to expect with these little guys here, but so far they look very much like pencils. Also, I should mention it's no real secret here that these Crayola are generally seen as more of a budget option for pencils, but more expensive doesn't necessarily mean better, and hopefully cheaper doesn't mean bad. So, what we're going to do today is take our Crayolas and throw our series of tests at them to work out just how good they actually are. First up, let's take a look at the pencil design. This is the Crayola Colored Pencils box of 100, and it's just that, a cardboard box. Looking at the Crayola site, this range has plenty of options available, including boxes of 8, 12, 24, 36, buckets of 48, and this box right here, the 100 Colored Pencils box. The box is in the traditional Crayola yellow and green, and it's fairly simple. Its cover branding is straight to the point, although it does give us a little glimpse of the colours of the pencils inside, and tells us these pencils are made with reforested wood. If we turn the packet over, we have further information about the sustainability aspects and a really large colour swatch. Although these colours printed here look very digital, so I'm not sure how accurate they are to our real life pencils. If we open our box, this cardboard is very, very thin. You can see I've already damaged it here at the top. If I'm careful, and there are the pencils. They are separated into two lots of 50, and they look like they're separated by a cardboard divider. I think if I pull on that divider, one of these, it should come out. Basically, it's two small trays of pencils contained in this pack. Overall, they appear to be very vibrant pencils, but this packaging is very thin, and no, you really wouldn't want to store your pencils back inside it. Let's have an even closer look at the pencils. This is the Crayola Colored Pencil. It's very much what I'd call a classic pencil design. The barrel has a relatively satiny finish with the paint, and the design itself is quite simple. The wax base core is vibrant enough but not super bright, and it's surrounded by a reforested wood barrel made of incense cedar. The pencil's length is a fairly average length of 175mm or 6.9 inches, and the overall diameter of the pencil comes in at a slimish 7.2mm. If we look along the barrel, we can see the almost satiny finish on the pencil paint, followed by lightly indented, mysterious numbers and a gold Crayola stamp. Past that is the colour code in English, Spanish and French. The gold lettering here feels a little rough in how it's been made. The end of the pencil is just a 90-degree cutoff, and frankly, nothing majorly special. I keep saying here that the Crayola look and feel like pencils, and that's pretty much it. There really is nothing that's jumping out to me in the design or the branding here that makes them particularly unique. I've said it before and I'll say it again, they look like, well, pencils. That said, I'm really enjoying the range of colours they have here. It is a 100 pencil kit, but spoiler alert for later, buying a 100 pencil kit here was actually really cheap. So if I was a kid and I was given all of these colours, I'd be pretty happy. Anyway, that's the physical side of our Crayola pencils. What we're going to do next is a series of tests, some scientific and some just my personal opinion or the vibe. First up, let's test the saturation and vibrancy. Our first test today is the saturation and vibrancy test. In this test, we look at how bright and how saturated we can make these pencils and how consistent they are across various weights. A lot of factors contribute to these results, including the hardness of the lead, the composition of the core, but also how vibrant the different colored pigments used in the pencils are. Anyway, because we don't have time to test all the pencils in these packs, I'm going to pick 4 colors from each kit, plus our dominant black and white, and we'll run the tests on each of these and then assess the results. The colors I've chosen for the Crayola are red, red, green, green, blue, blue, yellow, yellow, white, white, and black, black. With our saturation and vibrancy test, the way we're going to be doing this is by putting down pigment from the pencils at 5 different pressures: 25 grams, 50 grams, 100 grams, 200 grams, and 400 grams, so light to heavy. As the pressure builds up, hopefully the pencil should become more and more saturated. This scale is of course from my kitchen and not a lab, so the numbers might jump around a little. And for any paper people out there, I'm just using basic 120 GSM white multimedia paper for these tests. As you can see, straight away these pencils are obviously used. Like our previous test with the Faber-Castell Black Edition, I made a mistake filming these pencil tests. So rather than just hoping you wouldn't notice the bad tests, I'm just going to film them again with the used pencils. But this time, film it right. That's that, let's get started. Let's start off as normal with our admittedly very small red pencil at our 25 gram weight. I've started a little heavier than our 25 gram, but it's going down okay. It is overall quite light at this stage, but it's fairly close to what I'd expect at 25 grams. The green is very similar to the red here at the 25 gram weight. Again, starting slightly heavier, but it goes down relatively saturated. If I go a little slower on the blue, it does seem to be very consistent with the red and green. That yellow, like yellows often are, is super light, and it's pretty hard to see here at the 25 grams. The black, while not a particularly strong black, is still quite saturated here at the 25 grams. Let's have a look at the 50 grams. Starting with the red, we've had a decent increase in saturation here. It's always tough to tell if it's a full 100% or not quite. The green, like the red, is very similar, but maybe not quite 100%. The blue is most definitely a 100% increase and turning out to be quite a nice blue. That yellow has improved quite a bit, but you can see as the numbers on the scale jump around a bit, it's going from quite a bit darker to much lighter. Smaller pressure jumps here are making a big difference. The black is a little bit more saturated. I'd say it's in line with the red here. Just a note, the lead of the black did keep breaking doing this test. The hole of the tip of the lead also fell out twice, which isn't ideal. Now for the 100 grams. The saturation on the red at the 100 grams is pretty good. We've got quite a lot more saturation and vibrancy happening. But I am finding my pressure bouncing around a lot with this pencil. The green is looking quite similar to the red at this point with a nice increase in saturation and vibrancy. I'd say our blue hasn't gone up quite so much as the red and green here at the 100 grams. But it still had an okay increase. The yellow, while it's still tricky to see, is looking much more saturated at our 100 grams. And the black, while it's still quite a grey black, it has had a really nice increase in saturation at this point. Going into the 200 grams now, I think we're finally definitely doubling our red saturation and vibrancy here at the 200 grams. It's starting to look super vibrant. The green too has had a really good bump up in saturation here. The blue looks like we've gotten much more saturation down at the 200 grams. But the yellow, honestly, it's tricky to tell, but I think we've had an increase in saturation and vibrancy. I'd say the black is very similar to the red, green, and blue in terms of an increase in saturation here at the 200 grams. Okay, lastly, let's get into the 400 grams. 400 grams is our heaviest weight today, so hopefully we see a good increase in saturation and vibrancy. Starting with the red, we can see the red's really shining at our 400 grams, although you can definitely see the differences in lighter and darker shades as the pencil bounces a bit through the weights. The green has increased again, but I don't think it's as dramatic as the red. The blue has done well here at the 400 grams and has had a really good increase in saturation, but like the red, you can see it's pretty blotchy as the weight bounces about a bit. The yellow yellow has done exceptionally well, becoming quite vibrant and saturated. The black has also had a great increase at the 400 grams, and to be fair, is actually becoming closer to what I'd consider a true black color to be. Let's check out our white pencil. Our 25 grams has gone down fairly lightly here and feels a little scratchy. The 50 grams is very similar to the 25 and definitely not a doubling. The 100 grams is a little bit better, but definitely not a doubling from the 50 grams. The 200 grams is an increase in saturation, but again, not a doubling. And finally, the 400 grams. It's of course the most impressive, but again, not a doubling from the 200 grams. Not a super white pencil. Well, that was our saturation and vibrancy test, and it was really quite interesting. So far, the Crayola are quite smooth to use and the round barrel is relatively comfy to hold. The only way I can describe them is it feels like in your hand is a really basic everyday pencil. As I worked my way through our weights, I found the saturation a bit patchy and difficult to control. It seemed the pigment put down changed quite a lot, really visibly with very small changes in pressure, which when you're trying to create a consistent color is not great for us, the user. Of course, there's always going to be a little bit of error in the weight that I put down with each pencil, but strangely, this was much more noticeable than usual, which has kind of given it a lighter than darker texture through some of our swatches, which wasn't great. It was also quite hard to get to the 400 grams. I felt like I really had to force the pencils to get to this weight, which wasn't super comfortable. Color and saturation wise, they did surprisingly well once we got into the higher weights. The color that was there is fairly saturated and quite vibrant. The blue particularly stood out to me as a great color at the 400 grams, and that yellow is also quite pleasant as well. Time to give our Crayolas a score here. To do that, we're going to be using our scale of A to F, with S sitting above it all, being superb. Today, for the Crayola, I'm going to give them a C+ for the saturation and vibrancy test. While they are surprisingly bright colors, the consistency and color varies quite a lot with very minimal weight changes, which makes them hard to control. Our next test is the single pencil gradient test. This is a pretty stock standard test for any pencil, and that's because it tells us a lot about the characteristics of that pencil and, importantly, how much control we have over it. We've been doing the last few of these tests on the scale as well, and I think we're going to keep going with that. What we're looking for here is a nice seamless gradient, while taking into account how easy it is to go from a very heavy pressure to a very light pressure and how the pencil feels while doing so. Let's go see how the Crayolas go. As always, we're starting with our red pencil and pushing as hard as we can to as light as we can. One of the interesting things with doing this one on the scale is you can easily see where I start pulling off the weight. Interestingly, although I did drop from 300 grams to 200 grams quickly, the Crayola red became quite light very quickly. The red is a bit difficult to control as we continue down, but it's relatively smooth. The green starts similar to the red with a similar drop from that 300 to the 200 gram weight. I am struggling here to keep this one fairly consistent as well, and I'm finding it particularly hard to keep it even in the transition from the heavy weights to the lighter weights. It does go into the lighter weight well though. The blue is very consistent with the red and green here, although I am struggling a bit and have dropped very quickly through the heavy side of things into the lighter weights. Like our previous test, there is a decent amount of pigment going down at these lighter weights. The yellow, I think I've managed to keep things a bit more consistent as I gradient down here through the weights. You can see the pencil jumping around a bit as I struggle to keep the weight consistent. But overall, it's a fairly decent gradient down from heavy to light. The black's not too bad as it goes down. I've managed to get a relatively smooth gradient here, but as it goes from heavy to light, you can see more of the pencil bouncing around a bit in the contrast of the dark on the white paper. It's also not a super dark black. Let's check out our white on our black cardboard. Interestingly, it starts off okay, but not really vibrant. But as the weight drops from the 300s to the 100 gram mark, there isn't a huge amount of difference. Like the colored versions, I'm struggling to keep control of it. Right, this test basically confirmed what we saw in the saturation and vibrancy test. There's a real lack of consistency with these pencils. Firstly, I found it really hard work to keep our gradients smooth, particularly in the heavier weights, which were hard to get to in the first place. But once we got there, they wanted to pull out of those heavy weights really quickly. I'm honestly fairly impressed I managed to keep everything as smooth as I did in this test. I was really fighting a battle with these guys the whole way. One thing I'm also starting to notice here is that the Crayola black is not very nice and kind of grey. It's not a super strong black at all, and I suspect you'd need to use another brand's black to get that super dark blackness in your work. The Crayola white also seems to be pretty average. It's not a very bright or vivid white. I think perhaps you'd use it more as a blending tool than an actual lightning white. But honestly, even for that, I don't know if it's going to be that great. I also, across every pencil here, had a lot of difficulty sharpening the Crayola for this test. The wood just kept breaking. I used a variety of sharpeners and eventually found one that got an okayish point, but it was pretty tough. I was worried the whole pencil would break, so I guess a good tip for the Crayola pencils is to make sure you're using a pencil sharpener that really is extremely sharp. Otherwise, you're just gonna wreck your pencils. So let's aggregate and grade our 6 pencils on our A to S scale. I'm giving the Crayola a pretty average score of a C in gradients because they're pretty average. And that slots them here. The color is there, but they are so difficult to control. A C is a good mark for them. Blending. I say it pretty much every time. Blending is one of the most important things we look for in our colored pencils. A good blend takes our art from the average to the extraordinary. And let's be honest, it's always going to make working with our pencils much easier. For this test, I'm taking my 4 primary colors, a red to green and blue to yellow, and we're going to blend them. We're going to be paying special attention to what happens with the points of those gradients where the colors meet. Let's see how they go. Let's do our red gradient first up. As far as gradients go, that's not too bad. Time for our green. Interestingly, I'm finding it much easier to control this pencil coming up from the bottom of the page. As we transition over our red here, we're getting a bit of a blend happening, but it's very minimal. Interestingly, I can actually feel the red pigment under my pencil as the green goes over the top. It's almost a scratchy, gritty feeling. Time for the blue, and down we go. I'm hoping for a bit of a better blend here, as the blue and yellow, being a bit lighter, always tends to find it easier to combine. Up goes our yellow, and we're getting a green coming through, better than the other side of the page at least. But again, it's not great nor very vibrant. It feels again like the blue pigment is catching and scratching onto that yellow. Well, that was the blending test. I did struggle a bit with the control of our gradients again, which made it quite difficult to do. I'm having the exact same issue I had in the last test really. As soon as I try and go a bit lighter with my pressure, these pencils would just drop straight through the heavier, denser weights. Strangely, it's also much easier to push up the page with this pencil rather than come down, but that might just be a personal preference. Now the blend. It's not great, is it? The blending between the red and the green isn't great. We're seeing a little bit of blending where those colors meet, which are forming like a light purple color, but it's really not very much. It also felt like the green pigment was hitting and bouncing over the red pigment, which made it feel scratchy as I worked. On the other side, the blue and yellow, which usually do the best, have done equally as poorly. Again, tiny bit of green coming through, but the scratchy, bouncy feeling felt very similar. Overall, I just don't think these pencils blend well. They really do lack that buttery feel we look for with good blending pencils, being much more of a really scratchy feel. For you Crayola lovers out there, that doesn't mean you can't blend, just that it's gonna come down to layers and a lot more work to get something decent. But for me, for the blending test, I'm giving the Crayolas a D. Not great. I usually say something positive here, but for all their charms, these pencils are not good at blending. It's time to check out this white pencil in a little bit more detail. I'm always asked why I do a white test when testing pencils, and the answer is because sometimes it really surprises me. For this test, I'm bringing back our blending test we prepared earlier and bringing in our white pencil to lay over the top of the primary colors. We're going to see what effect, if any, this pencil has with our blend. Let's see what happens. This is always a really quick test, and it becomes very apparent very quickly how good this white pencil is. You can see here it's helped burnish and lighten our heaviest weight on the red and green, but done nothing in between. As we come down on our blue and yellow, it's very similar. It may help pop that green blend slightly, but it's such a small result, it's not really that noticeable. Well, I think you'd agree this isn't a very vibrant white, which is slightly surprising. The white wasn't bad when we tested it on the black cardboard, so I was expecting a little bit more, but because the other pigments on the paper are so, I guess, firm is the word, the white has really done nothing to help in lightening the blend at all. Because of that firmness, it hasn't even really acted like a blending stick either. I think you may find a use for this white in burnishing and pasteling these pencils at a really heavy weight, but other than that, it's not going to be super helpful. Because of that, I think I'm going to be grading our Crayolas a C- in the white factor. And that puts them here. Possibly they could be useful in blending with more buttery pencils, but here, not so much. In this test, we compare the color the pencil puts down to the color displayed on the barrel swatch. This test is a simple test, but it's important because the swatch is really the only way we know what the color of the pencil is before we pick it up. For this test, I'm bringing in the pencil barrel and putting it next to the gradient that we created earlier. And we're just going to compare them by eye to see how accurate the colors are. As I'm placing our red down, it's pretty obvious that the barrel is a lot darker than the pigment put down. Weirdly, I think I like the pigment better than the barrel. The green is exactly the same story. It's the same issue in our blue, with the barrel being much darker than the pigment we have on the page. The yellow, I would say, is actually the closest of the colors to the pigment put down here, but again, it's a bit darker and richer on the barrel. And our black. The black isn't too bad, honestly, but I'd say the barrel is still darker and richer than our black pencil's pigment. Well, that was very quick, and as you can see, pretty disappointing. Our color accuracy is a bit average. Our red, green, blue, and black Crayola barrels are all a bit darker, richer, and more vibrant than the pigment put down, which is such a shame, as most of the colors we get, at least in the heavy side of the pigment, are actually quite bright and fairly lovely. That yellow is the best, but again, the barrel is more vibrant than the pigment. It's about 80% compared to the rest is like 40%. So good job, yellow, I guess. I think with color accuracy, it's such a simple thing for a company to get right. This is really one where we really should be a little bit tougher with our marking. So for a slightly tougher score because of dodgy colors, we're going to give Crayola a solid C- for color accuracy today. In this case, I think C- is accurate because most of the colors simply don't match. Alrighty folks, it is time for my favorite test, the break factor. How much pressure do we need to put on these pencils before they break? There's a couple of things we're looking for in this test. Firstly, when you look at a break point in a pencil, it's all about consistency. Does a brand have a consistent mix in their core to get a similar snapping point every single time? Also, how hard or how soft is the pencil? I've made a couple of assumptions in how these pencils have felt throughout this video, particularly because they feel a bit harder, but I'm often surprised here, so let's go check them out and see how they go. To make this test as consistent as possible across all of the pencils, we're going to set up a couple of controls. I'm going to sharpen each pencil to a point. Well, I'm going to try to anyway. Look at this blue. Basically, it looks like the core isn't central, so it's sharpening weirdly. I finally got it to work on a manual sharpener, but it took a lot of tries. Anyway, for this test, I'm then going to dull them slightly by drawing 3 lines at pressure. Basically, this will make sure we don't have a super fine point that will break immediately. I'm then going to be using a 45-degree square to get a consistent angle of pressure. Makes sense? Let's go break some leads. Let's take the tip off that red and set up our angle. I've felt these pencils have been fairly hard throughout this test, so as the pressure starts building, I'm not sure what to expect. But not that! 468 grams is much lower than I thought it would be. That lead just snapped clean off. Let's try our green now. 1, 2, 3, and we'll set up our angle of pressure. The angle is on and the pressure is rising. Already, we're well past the red's break point. 1 kilogram, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and snap! 1,658 grams, just a wee bit harder than our red pencil. Onto our blue. This one I had a lot of trouble sharpening, so hopefully we don't get a weird result here. The setup is done and the pressure is building. 500, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1 kilo, and snap! 1,238 grams. Hard, but not as hard as the green. Our yellow is next. Right or wrong, I'm always assuming lighter colors are going to be weaker. Even though most times this has proven not to be the case, I still assume it every single time. The weight is on and the numbers are climbing. 400, 500, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and snap! 1,165 grams, surprisingly close to our blue snap point. The tip is coming off our black and the angle is set up and the pressure is on. We're adding pressure very quickly here and already just over a kilogram. 12, 13, and snap! 1,426 grams. Not too bad and fairly consistent with most of the other colors. Now our final pencil, the white. White can sometimes be a lot softer than the other pencils, but this white hasn't been terribly vibrant, so I don't think this will be the case here. The pencil is set up and the pressure is on. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and snap! 1,164 grams. 1 gram different from our yellow. Very, very close. And that was our break test. So let's you and I have a talk about that red pencil. A snapping point of 468 grams sounds weird. A suspicious viewer could say, oh sunshine, that's just an accident. The pencil obviously had a flaw in it or you've dropped it to break it there. And me, being a reasonable person, would say to you, bite your tongue, I don't drop my pencils. But yes, you may be partially right on the flaw of the core. But here's the thing. I do most of these tests multiple times, and while in this version it was the red that snapped, in every other version I did of this, it was another pencil that actually snapped at such a low weight. That, coupled with the struggles I've had to sharpen these and the fact that throughout all of these tests, the pencil leads have been randomly breaking with very little pressure, says to me that consistency of the pencils is very poor. There's that, and there's now apparently this. So that's why I stuck with the red pencil score here rather than simply keep doing the test till I had one that looked closer to the rest. This test is hardness, but it's also about the consistency. Anyway, if we look at these results, we have a low of 468 grams for the red and a high of 1,658 for the green, which when we combine and average them gives us an average break point of 1,186 grams. Very close to what we had as break points on the yellow and white. If we slot them into our big scoreboard here, they're coming in as one of our hardest pencils, slightly above the black edition, but well below the Tombow. Let's give these pencils a score for the break test. They aren't great. I'm going to do something a little bit different here and also consider how often they've broken across all of our other tests as well for this final score. And for that reason, I'm going to give them a D. Quite strong overall, but if that strength means the core constantly breaks internally, there's very little value in having that hardness. It's time for our final test. Do these pencils spark joy, or do they cause despair? This test is simply my personal opinion, which I've formed across this whole video. Do the Crayola Colored Pencils spark joy? Let's look at the design. It's nothing special. The pencils feel fine in your hand, but realistically, if you were asked to describe a generic colored pencil, this would be pretty much what you'd come up with. The packaging, like a lot of packaging aimed at a younger market, which this obviously is, isn't designed for longevity. These pencils are made to be loaded straight into a pencil case, and you know what? That's completely fine. Color-wise, I actually really like them. I think I mentioned this before. They are crazy cheap pencils, and for the price, you get an amazing array of colors. If we break that price down, the 12 pencil kit starts at $4.98 Australian, which is $3.30 US, right up to $39.93 Australian for the 100 pencil kit I have here. That is such a good price for so many colors. I love it. Test-wise, they haven't scored well. They do have a surprisingly nice color saturation when used at heavy weights, but you do really have to struggle to hold that weight. And they sort of bounce a bit in your hand, that makes using them a bit uncomfortable. For heavy color blocks, they're fine, but anything subtler, they aren't crash hot. Blending really is very poor with these pencils. There's no other way to put it. I suspect you could get an okay blend if you wanted to put in the time, but to be fair, to get a decent result, it'd be more down to layering rather than the pencil simply blending on the page. The break test really showed us that the quality of the Crayola's construction hasn't been great either. Leads constantly snap throughout these tests, and obvious problems with the cord's centralization make them hard to sharpen. These pencils really are intended for younger children, so I guess a lot of these problems we've seen today are due to a pencil that's definitely been made to a budget. You do get an awful lot of color range for a very low price, so if that's what you're looking for, then I think these may be for you. But for me, I prefer slightly less color, but pencils I can do a lot more with. So for today, I'm going to say that no, these pencils do not spark joy. There's a lot of color, but it's a meh pencil experience. For today's joy factor, I'm going to give them a score of a C-. And that puts them right here on the scoreboard. Well, that's it. All our tests are done, and all that's left to do is work out our final score. How we do that is by taking all the results they've received across all our tests and aggregating them with a final mark. So, for our final overall score of the Crayola Colored Pencils is a C-. If we put them on our big scale, they go right in here. I don't think there's much surprise as to what we're going to class these pencils as today: student, hobbyist, or professional. I think without a doubt the Crayolas are most definitely classed as student pencils. And that puts them right up here amongst some other excellent student pencils. Well, that's it. I really hope you enjoyed checking out the Crayolas with me today. Even though they haven't quite lived up to my expectations, I have very much enjoyed checking them out. What do you think? Did you use them as a kid, or do you still use them now? Do you love them, or do you agree with my findings? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. I'm actually quite interested to know if anyone out there knows the difference between these Crayola and the Signature series, which Crayola advertises for their adult colouring. Are they better, and should we test them in the future? Anyway, speaking of testing, we haven't got through every pencil ever just quite yet, but next time we're going to take a look at something a little different and check out some alcohol markers. I bought this massive kit of markers from Ohuhu, and I can't wait to see what they're actually like. But until then, if you want more stuff, have a little look at the links below, and we have a very active Discord that you can sign up for. Or if you want to come and chat and hang out with us on Twitch, I'm there most days. That's it for now, everyone. Have a brilliant day. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.